In the heart of ancient Ireland, when the land was wild and filled with the whispers of gods and spirits, a boy was born. His name was Setanta, and his story would be one of the most cherished tales in all of Irish history. But Setanta was no ordinary child. From the very moment he took his first breath, there was something extraordinary about him, something that made even the oldest druids pause and wonder. Setanta's mother, Dectyre, was a woman of great beauty and strength, but it was his father who brought the touch of the divine into Setanta's blood. His father, Sualtam, was a warrior, brave and strong, but it was the connection to the god Lugh that truly set Setanta apart. Lugh, the sun god, was known for his skills in battle, wisdom, and unmatched courage. It was whispered that Lugh himself had a hand in Setanta's birth, that the child carried the spark of the god within him. From the very beginning, there were signs that Setanta was destined for greatness. As a baby, he was unusually strong, his grip tight, his gaze piercing. When other children were still stumbling, he walked with confidence, his small steps filled with purpose. There was a fire in his eyes, a determination that spoke of a future filled with remarkable deeds. As he grew, the prophecy that had been whispered at his birth began to take shape. The Druids, wise and ancient, saw visions of a boy who would become a hero like none before him. They spoke of battles, of triumphs, and of a name that would echo through the ages. But they also saw sorrow, a life marked by loss and hardship. It was a burden too heavy for a child, yet Setanta bore it with a strength that belied his years. His early life was filled with the simple joys of childhood, yet even in play, Setanta stood apart. While other boys played at war, their wooden swords clashing harmlessly, Setanta fought with a passion and skill that left even the older boys in awe. He was quick, strong, and fearless, his laughter ringing out as he bested one opponent after another. But it wasn't just his physical prowess that set him apart. There was a sharpness to his mind, a way of seeing the world that was beyond his years. Setanta's training began early, under the watchful eye of his father. Sualtam knew that his son was destined for great things, and he prepared him for the world that awaited him. They spent hours together, father and son, the sound of their swords clashing filling the air. Sualtam was a stern teacher, but there was love in every correction, pride in every word of encouragement. He taught Setanta not just how to fight, but how to think, how to see the world as a warrior must. But it wasn't only Sualtam who saw the promise in Setanta. The warriors of Ulster, fierce and proud, took notice of the boy who seemed to have the strength of 10 men. They watched as he practiced, as he honed his skills with a determination that was rare even among seasoned fighters. It was said that when Setanta fought, it was as if he was guided by something more than just skill, as if the gods themselves were whispering in his ear. Yet for all his strength and skill, Setanta was still a boy, and there were moments when the weight of the prophecy seemed too much to bear. He would sit by the fire at night, his young face illuminated by the flames, his eyes far away. He knew what was expected of him, what the Druids had seen in their visions. He knew that he was meant to be a hero, but there was a part of him that longed for the simple life of a boy, free from the burdens of destiny. But destiny is not something that can be escaped, and as Setanta grew, the signs of his future greatness only became clearer. There was a day, still spoken of in hushed tones by those who witnessed it, when Setanta showed the true extent of his power. He had gone hunting with the other boys, his spear in hand, his eyes sharp and focused. As they walked through the forest, a great hound appeared, its eyes glowing with a fierce light. The other boys froze, fear gripping their hearts, but not Setanta. Without hesitation, he raised his spear and threw it with all his might. The hound fell, struck down by a boy not yet in his teens. The other boys stared in awe, their fear replaced by admiration. They knew then that Setanta was no ordinary boy, that he was destined for something far greater than any of them could imagine. But it wasn't just the boys who took notice. The warriors of Ulster, hearing of the deed, began to speak of Setanta with reverence, their voices filled with a mixture of respect and awe. They knew that one day, he would stand among them, not as a boy, but as a hero. Setanta's training continued, each day bringing him closer to the destiny that awaited him. He learned the art of war, of strategy, of leadership. He learned how to wield a sword with the precision of a master, how to ride a horse into battle, how to inspire men with a single word. But more than that, he learned what it meant to be a hero, the weight of the responsibility that came with the title. And so, Setanta grew, each day bringing him closer to the moment when he would step into his true identity. The boy who had once been known only as Setanta was becoming something more, something that would be remembered long after he was gone. The prophecy was beginning to unfold, the signs of his greatness becoming impossible to ignore. The warriors of Ulster began to speak of him not as a boy, but as a man who would one day lead them into battle, a man who would be known as Cú Chulainn. In the quiet moments, when the fire had burned low and the night was still, Setanta would think of the future that awaited him. He knew that his life would not be an easy one, that the path of a hero was filled with hardship and sacrifice. But there was no fear in his heart, only a deep, unshakable resolve. He knew who he was, and who he was meant to be. The boy who had been born with the blood of gods was ready to embrace his destiny, to take his place among the greatest heroes of Ireland. The name Setanta would soon be forgotten, replaced by a name that would strike fear into the hearts of his enemies and inspire generations to come. For the prophecy was clear, and the boy who had once been known as Setanta was destined to become Cú Chulainn, the greatest hero Ireland had ever known. The evening sky was painted in hues of gold and pink as Setanta, a boy still in the bloom of youth, made his way to the great fortress of Cooley. His heart was light, his spirit full of excitement, for he was on his way to meet the great warriors of Ulster. But there was something else that stirred within him, something deeper, an unspoken feeling that this day would be unlike any other. Setanta's steps quickened as he approached the fortress. He had been invited by the king himself to join in the feast, a rare honor for one so young. As he walked, he imagined the roaring fires, the laughter of the warriors, the tales of battles won and lost. His blood raced at the thought of sitting among them, listening to their stories, sharing in their triumphs. He was just a boy, but he had the heart of a warrior, and tonight he would stand among the greatest of them all. But as Setanta drew closer to the fortress, he realized something had gone wrong. The gates were closed, the walls tall and imposing. He had arrived later than expected, and the feast had already begun. The sounds of music and laughter drifted out from within, but there was no one to open the gates for him. Setanta felt a pang of frustration, but he was not one to give up easily. He decided he would enter on his own. With the agility of a young deer, Setanta scaled the walls and dropped down silently inside the courtyard. He landed lightly on his feet, his senses sharp, his every movement controlled. But as he stood, he heard a low, menacing growl. His heart skipped a beat, and he turned to see a massive hound, the guardian of Culein's fortress, baring its teeth at him. The hound was no ordinary dog. It was a beast of immense power, trained to protect the fortress from any who dared enter uninvited. Its eyes glowed with a fierce light, its muscles rippling beneath its sleek fur. It was a creature bred for one purpose, to kill. Setanta froze for just a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. But then, something shifted within him. The fear melted away, replaced by a fierce determination. He would not let this beast stop him. He was Setanta, son of Swaltam, and he would not be bested by any creature, no matter how fearsome. Without hesitation, Setanta reached for his hurley and slitter, the tools of the game he loved so dearly. With a strength and precision beyond his years, he struck the slitter with all his might. It soared through the air like a bolt of lightning, striking the hound squarely on the head. The beast staggered, a low growl escaping its throat, but it did not fall. It advanced on Setanta, its eyes locked on him, its teeth bared. Setanta knew he had only one chance. He gripped his hurley tightly and rushed forward, meeting the hound head-on. With a swift, powerful swing, he struck the beast again, this time with enough force to bring it down. The hound let out a final, mournful cry before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. For a moment, there was only silence. Setanta stood over the fallen hound, his chest heaving, his heart still racing. He had done it. He had slain the great Hound of Cooley. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a new emotion washed over him, sorrow. The hound had only been doing its duty, protecting its master's fortress. And now, because of him, it was dead. The doors of the fortress burst open, and the warriors of Ulster, along with Cúlainn himself, rushed out to see what had happened. They stopped in their tracks when they saw the scene before them, the young boy standing over the body of the great hound. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Cúlainn spoke, his voice heavy with grief. "My hound," he said, his eyes fixed on the lifeless form at Setanta's feet. "He was more than just a guardian. He was my companion, my protector. What have you done, boy?" Setanta felt the weight of Cúlainn's words press down on him. He had not meant to cause harm, but he knew there was no taking back what had been done. The hound was dead, and it was his doing. But Setanta was not one to shy away from responsibility. He stepped forward, his voice steady, though his heart ached with remorse. "I did what I had to do," Setanta said, his eyes meeting Cúlainn's. "But I cannot undo what has been done. Your hound is dead, and for that, I am truly sorry. But I will not leave you unprotected. I will take its place. I will guard your fortress until you find another hound as great as the one I have slain." The warriors of Ulster murmured among themselves, astonished by the boy's courage and sense of honor. But Cúlainn was silent, his eyes steadying Setanta with a mix of sorrow and respect. Finally, he nodded. "You are a brave boy, Setanta," Cúlainn said, his voice softening. "And a man of your word. From this day forth, you will no longer be known as Setanta. You will be called Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Cúlainn, for you have proven yourself worthy of that name." The warriors of Ulster cheered, their voices echoing through the night. Setanta, now Cú Chulainn, stood tall, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sadness. He had taken on a great responsibility, and with it, a new name, one that would forever tie him to the hound he had slain. It was a name that would become legendary, a name that would be spoken of for generations to come. But in that moment, as the cheers of the warriors filled the air, Cú Chulainn could only think of the hound that lay at his feet, the beast that had given its life in the line of duty. He knelt beside it, placing a hand on its still form, a silent promise passing through his heart. He would live up to the name he had been given, he would protect and serve with all the strength he had. He would be the Hound of Cúlainn, not just in name, but in spirit. The winds were fierce, howling like restless spirits as Cú Chulainn set sail for the distant Isle of Skye. His heart was a storm of emotions, determination, anticipation, and the faintest whisper of fear. He had faced many challenges, but this was different. This was a test of his very soul, a trial that would shape him into the warrior he was destined to become. The journey was long and treacherous, the sea churning beneath the small boat that carried him toward his fate. Each wave that crashed against the hull seemed to echo the pounding of his heart, but he did not waver. He knew what awaited him on that distant isle, a warrior unlike any other, a woman whose name was spoken in hushed tones, Scathach, the Shadow. When the boat finally touched the shore, Cú Chulainn stepped onto the rocky land, his muscles aching from the journey, but his resolve unbroken. The Isle of Skye was wild, untamed, a place where only the strong could survive. He could feel the power of the land beneath his feet, a raw energy that seemed to pulse through the earth and into his very bones. He was not afraid. He had come to learn, to be forged in the fires of battle, and he would not be turned away. The path to Scathach's fortress was steep and treacherous, winding through jagged cliffs and dense forests. Cú Chulainn moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the fortress that loomed on the horizon. Each step was a challenge, but he welcomed it. This was what he had been born for, this was his destiny. When he finally reached the fortress, the gates creaked open as if they had been expecting him. The air inside was thick with the scent of sweat and steel, the unmistakable smell of warriors in training. Scathach herself stood at the center of the courtyard, her eyes like twin embers burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through Cú Chulainn's very soul. She was tall and strong, her presence commanding, but it was her eyes that held the true power. They were the eyes of someone who had seen death and mastered it, someone who could teach him to do the same. Without a word, Scathach motioned for Cú Chulainn to follow her. The training began immediately, with no time for rest or introductions. Every moment was a test of his strength, his endurance, his will to survive. Scathach's methods were brutal, her expectations impossibly high. But Cú Chulainn did not falter. He pushed himself beyond his limits, driven by a fire that burned within him, a fire that would not be extinguished. Day after day, he trained under Scathach's watchful eye. His muscles ached, his body bruised and battered, but he refused to give in. Each strike of the sword, each swing of the spear, was an opportunity to prove himself, to show Scathach that he was worthy of her teachings. And slowly, he began to see the change within himself. His movements became quicker, more precise. His mind sharper, more focused. He was no longer just a boy, he was becoming a warrior. But the training was not without its dangers. Scathach pushed him to the brink, forcing him to confront his fears, to face death head-on. There were moments when he thought he could not go on, when the weight of his exhaustion threatened to crush him. But in those moments, he remembered who he was, what he had come for, and he found the strength to continue. Scathach had a way of seeing into his soul, of knowing exactly what he needed to become the warrior he was meant to be. She did not coddle him, did not offer words of comfort or praise. But there was a silent understanding between them, a respect that grew with each passing day. And then came the day when Scathach brought out the weapon that would become the symbol of Cú Chulainn's power, the Gí Bulgaria. It was no ordinary spear. Forged from the bones of a sea monster, it was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of piercing through any armor, of killing with a single strike. But it was also a weapon that required great skill to wield, a weapon that could just as easily destroy the one who held it. Scathach placed the Gí Bulg in Cú Chulainn's hands, her eyes never leaving his. There was no need for words, this was the final test, the moment that would define him as a warrior. The spear was heavy in his hands, its power humming through the air like a living thing. He could feel its energy, its hunger, and for a moment, he hesitated. But then, something within him shifted. The fear melted away, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. He was ready. The training with the Gí Bulg was unlike anything Cú Chulainn had ever experienced. It was as if the spear had a will of its own, as if it demanded more from him than any weapon he had ever wielded. Each strike was a battle, each movement a test of his strength and control. But he did not falter. He met the challenge head-on, pushing himself to the very edge of his abilities. And slowly, he began to master the spear, to feel its power becoming an extension of his own. Scathach watched him with a critical eye, her expression unreadable. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told Cú Chulainn he was on the right path. And then, finally, the day came when Scathach called an end to the training. Cú Chulainn stood before her, the Gí Bulg in his hands, his body worn but unbroken. "You have done well," Scathach said, her voice carrying the weight of her respect. "You are no longer a boy, Cú Chulainn. You are a warrior." The words hit him like a bolt of lightning, sending a thrill of pride through his veins. He had done it. He had passed the test, earned the respect of Scathach, and gained the power of the Gí Bulgaria. But more than that, he had become the warrior he was always meant to be. As Cú Chulainn left the Isle of Skye, the Gí Bulg strapped to his back, he knew that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a boy from Ulster, he was Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, a warrior of unmatched skill and power. And with the Gí Bulg in his hands, there was nothing he could not face, no enemy he could not defeat. The world would soon know his name, and it would tremble. In the heart of Ulster, there was a story that whispered through the winds, a tale of a woman wronged and a curse that would haunt the men of the land for generations. Macha was her name, a woman of otherworldly beauty and strength, who lived in peace with her husband, Craniac, a simple man who cherished her above all else. Their life together was quiet, filled with the warmth of love and the promise of a future that seemed as bright as the sun. But fate is often cruel, and the gods, even more so. One day, Craniac was summoned to the king's court, a place of power and pride where the lords of Ulster gathered to boast of their might and wealth. Macha, heavy with child, begged her husband not to go, sensing the danger that lay ahead. But Craniac, loyal and bound by duty, could not refuse the king's command. When he arrived at the court, the air was thick with the scent of mead and the sound of laughter. The men of Ulster were celebrating, their spirits high as they indulged in drink and tales of glory. It was in this atmosphere of revelry that Cúailnge made a grave mistake. In a moment of pride, he boasted of his wife's speed, claiming that she could outrun the king's fastest horses. The court fell silent, the air growing tense as the king, a man known for his pride and temper, demanded proof of this claim. Cúailnge, realizing too late the danger of his words, begged for mercy. But the king would not be swayed. He sent for Macha, ordering her to come at once to the court and prove her husband's boast. Macha arrived, her body heavy with the burden of impending birth, her heart filled with dread. She pleaded with the king to let her be, to allow her to give birth before fulfilling her husband's foolish boast. But the king was deaf to her pleas, his pride blinding him to the cruelty of his demands. With no choice, Macha prepared herself for the race. The men of Ulster lined the path, their eyes filled with anticipation as they watched her stand beside the king's horses. The signal was given, and Macha ran. The pain of childbirth tore through her with every step, but she did not stop. She ran with all the strength she could muster, her heart pounding in her chest, her vision blurred by the agony that consumed her. And as she crossed the finish line, a cry of triumph broke from the crowd. She had won. But the victory was hollow. As Macha collapsed to the ground, the pain too much to bear, she gave birth to twins. With her last breath, she cursed the men of Ulster for their cruelty, for their pride that had led to her suffering. For 9 generations, she gasped, her voice filled with a mix of sorrow and anger, the men of Ulster shall feel the pain I felt this day. In the hour of their greatest need, they will be struck down with the weakness of childbirth, unable to lift their swords or defend their land. The curse of Macha was as potent as it was tragic. From that day forward, whenever Ulster faced danger, the men were struck down, writhing in agony, powerless to fight. The curse hung over the land like a dark cloud, a reminder of the price of pride and the wrath of a woman wronged. For Cú Chulainn, the curse was both a burden and a source of strength. He was not bound by it, for his birth was not of Ulster, but of the gods. Yet he could not escape its shadow. He watched as the warriors he fought beside fell to their knees, helpless in the face of the curse. It was in these moments that Cú Chulainn's true nature shone through. While others were laid low, he stood tall, his heart filled with a fierce determination to protect the land he loved. But the curse also isolated him. He was a warrior without equal, a hero in a land that could not fight. The weight of that responsibility bore down on him, filling his nights with restless dreams and his days with an unrelenting drive to prove his worth. He trained harder, fought with a ferocity that left his enemies trembling. But in the quiet moments, when the battle was over and the cries of the wounded had faded, the loneliness set in. He was a hero, yes, but at what cost? The curse of Macha set the stage for the greatest test Cú Chulainn would ever face, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the Cattle Raid of Cooley. As the armies of Connacht gathered on the horizon, the men of Ulster were once again struck down by Macha's curse, their bodies racked with the pain that only Cú Chulainn could withstand. He stood alone, the weight of an entire kingdom resting on his young shoulders. And yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, there was no hesitation in his heart. The curse had made him stronger, more determined. He was the last line of defense, the only one who could stand against the tide of war that threatened to consume his homeland. The blood of the gods flowed through his veins, the legacy of his training with Scathack in his every movement. He was ready. As the armies of Connacht marched toward Ulster, the men of Ulster lay helpless, their bodies convulsing with the pain of childbirth. But in the midst of their suffering, there was a flicker of hope. For Cú Chulainn stood at the borders, his spear in hand, his eyes blazing with the fire of a warrior who had been forged in the fires of adversity. The curse of Macha may have crippled the men of Ulster, but it could not touch him. He would fight, he would protect, and he would do so with a heart filled with the memory of the woman who had been wronged, whose curse had shaped the destiny of an entire kingdom. In that moment, as the armies closed in and the battle loomed, Cú Chulainn understood the true meaning of Macha's curse. It was not just a punishment, but a test, a crucible that would forge heroes from the ashes of despair. And he, Cú Chulainn, would rise from those ashes, a beacon of hope in a land overshadowed by the darkness of a curse that had bound it for generations. In the stillness of the night, a restless wind swept across the lands of Ulster, carrying with it the whispers of an approaching storm. This storm, however, was not born of nature's fury, but of the ambitions of a powerful queen whose desires knew no bounds. Queen Medb of Connacht, a woman as cunning as she was fierce, had set her heart on a prize that would elevate her status above all others, the fabled brown bull of Cooley. The brown bull was no ordinary beast. It was a creature of immense power, a symbol of strength and prestige that would solidify Medb's claim as the greatest ruler in Ireland. But there was one problem. The bull belonged to Dair Mac Fiachna of Ulster, a kingdom already fractured and weakened by the curse of Macha. Medb's desire for the bull consumed her thoughts, filling her dreams with visions of conquest and glory. She would stop at nothing to possess it, even if it meant plunging all of Ireland into chaos. Medb's determination was matched only by her ruthlessness. She began to rally the forces of Connacht, calling upon her allies to join her in this quest. The word spread like wildfire, igniting the ambitions of those who had long harbored grudges against Ulster. Old rivalries were rekindled, and the promise of spoils drew warriors from far and wide to Medb's side. The armies of Connacht swelled, their ranks filled with fierce warriors, seasoned in battle, each eager to claim their share of the glory. As the drums of war echoed across the land, Ulster stood on the brink of disaster. The curse of Macha had struck once more, leaving its warriors helpless, writhing in agony, their bodies unable to bear the strain of the coming conflict. The once mighty kingdom was vulnerable, its defenses shattered, and its people gripped by fear. Yet, in the midst of this despair, one figure stood unbowed, his resolve as unyielding as the mountains that rose in the distance. Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, was a hero forged in the fires of hardship, a warrior whose name had already become legend. He was young, but his heart burned with a fire that no curse could extinguish. While the men of Ulster lay broken by the curse, Cú Chulainn stood alone, his spirit unbroken, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the armies of Connacht gathered like a dark cloud. He knew what was at stake, and he knew that the fate of Ulster rested in his hands. It was in this moment of impending doom that Cú Chulainn made a vow that would echo through the ages. He would defend Ulster single-handedly, standing as the last line of defense against the overwhelming forces that sought to destroy his homeland. The enormity of this vow was not lost on him. He was but one man against an army, yet he did not falter. The blood of the gods flowed through his veins, and the teachings of Scathack had honed his skills to a razor's edge. He was prepared to face whatever came, even if it meant facing death itself. As the dawn broke and the first light of day touched the land, Cú Chulainn stood at the borders of Ulster, his heart filled with a steely resolve. The warriors of Connacht approached, their numbers vast, their weapons gleaming in the early morning sun. But Cú Chulainn did not waver. With the Gee Bolg spear in hand, he prepared to face the enemy, knowing that each step they took toward Ulster brought them closer to their doom. The armies of Connacht were confident, their spirits high as they marched forward, eager to claim their prize. But they did not anticipate the fury that awaited them. Cú Chulainn was a force of nature, moving with a speed and precision that left his enemies in awe. He struck with the ferocity of a storm, his every movement a blur of power and grace. The ground beneath his feet was stained with the blood of those who dared to challenge him, their cries of pain lost to the wind. But this was only the beginning. Cú Chulainn knew that he could not rely on brute strength alone to win this battle. He had to be cunning, using every trick and tactic at his disposal to outwit an enemy that vastly outnumbered him. He took to the road, challenging the warriors of Connacht to single combat, knowing that their pride would compel them to accept. One by one, they fell before him, each victory fueling the legend of the Hound of Ulster. As the days turned into weeks, the toll of the battle weighed heavily on Cú Chulainn. His body bore the scars of countless fights, his strength tested to its limits. Yet he pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to protect the land he loved. He knew that the men of Ulster were watching, their hope resting on his shoulders. He could not afford to fail. Every victory, every life he took, was a testament to his unbreakable will, a promise that Ulster would not fall as long as he stood. But as the battle raged on, a new challenge emerged, one that would test not only Cú Chulainn's strength but his very soul. For Queen Med was not only a warrior but a master of manipulation. She sought to exploit Cú Chulainn's honor, to turn his own sense of justice against him. She sent her own daughter, Finnebere, to tempt him, hoping to weaken his resolve with the promise of love and peace. But Cú Chulainn, though tempted, saw through the ruse. His heart ached with the weight of the decisions he had to make, the sacrifices he was forced to endure, but he did not falter. He remained steadfast, his eyes fixed on the goal that lay before him, the defense of Ulster, no matter the cost. As the Táin Bó Cúailnge began in earnest, Cú Chulainn stood as the embodiment of courage and sacrifice, a hero whose name would be remembered for generations to come. The odds were against him, the enemy was relentless, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. He was the shield that stood between Ulster and its enemies, the warrior who had vowed to protect his land with every ounce of strength he possessed. And as the battle for the Brown Bull of Cooley raged on, Cú Chulainn's vow echoed through the hills of Ulster, a promise of hope in a time of darkness, a light that would not be extinguished. In the stillness of the early dawn, the air was thick with tension. Cú Chulainn stood alone on the battlefield, the echoes of his previous battles still fresh in his mind. He had faced countless warriors, each one more skilled than the last, but none had prepared him for what was to come. His heart was heavy, not with fear, but with the weight of the knowledge that the most challenging fight of his life was about to begin. This was no ordinary fight, this was a fight against someone he once called brother. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden hue across the landscape, Cú Chulainn's thoughts drifted to Ferdia, his foster brother, his closest friend. They had trained together under the fierce guidance of Scathach, their bond forged in the fires of countless battles and shared hardships. There was no one in the world Cú Chulainn respected more than Ferdia. They had laughed together, fought side by side, and sworn oaths of loyalty to each other. But now, those oaths were about to be tested in a way neither of them could have imagined. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence, and Cú Chulainn turned to see Ferdia standing across from him. The sight of his friend, now his enemy, sent a wave of sorrow crashing over him. Ferdia's face was a mask of determination, but Cú Chulainn could see the pain in his eyes. They both knew what was about to happen, but neither could turn away from the path that fate had set them on. Without a word, they began to prepare for battle, the air between them heavy with unspoken emotions. This was not a fight they wanted, but one they were bound to by honor and duty. Cú Chulainn's heart ached as he strapped on his armor, each piece feeling heavier than the last. He knew that only one of them would walk away from this fight, and the thought of killing the man he loved like a brother tore at his soul. As they faced each other, weapons drawn, the memories of their time together flooded Cú Chulainn's mind. He remembered the first time they had sparred, two young boys full of energy and dreams, unaware of the cruel twists of fate that lay ahead. He remembered the laughter they had shared, the secrets they had kept, and the deep bond that had made them more than just friends. But now, all of that seemed like a distant dream, a memory from another life. The first clash of their weapons sent a shockwave through the air, the sound reverberating like thunder. They moved with the grace and skill of warriors who knew each other's every move, every strength, every weakness. Each strike was met with a parry, each thrust with a counter, as they danced the deadly dance of combat. But beneath the surface, there was a hesitation, a reluctance to deliver the killing blow. For how could they? How could they kill the person who had been their closest companion? But as the battle wore on, the hesitation began to fade, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. Cú Chulainn could see the resolve in Ferdia's eyes, and he knew that there was no turning back. They were both bound by their honor, by the codes they had lived by all their lives. And so, they fought with all the skill and strength they had, each blow striking deeper than the last, not just in flesh, but in their hearts. The battle was fierce, and as the day wore on, both warriors began to tire. Their movements became slower, their strikes less precise, but the determination in their eyes never wavered. Blood stained the ground beneath them, the once green grass now slick with the evidence of their struggle. Cú Chulainn could feel his strength waning, but he pushed on, driven by a force greater than himself. And then, in a moment that felt like an eternity, Cú Chulainn saw an opening. His heart screamed at him to stop, to let Ferdia win, but his warrior's instincts took over. With a final, desperate thrust, he drove his spear into Ferdia's chest, the sound of the blade piercing flesh echoing in his ears like a death knell. Time seemed to freeze as Ferdia staggered, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Cú Chulainn's breath caught in his throat as he watched his friend fall to his knees, the light in his eyes dimming with each passing second. He rushed forward, catching Ferdia in his arms as he crumpled to the ground. The world around them faded away, leaving only the two of them, the battlefield now silent as death itself. Ferdia looked up at Cú Chulainn, his gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. There were no words spoken between them, for what could be said? The bond they had shared, the love they had felt, was now tainted by the blood that had been spilled. Cú Chulainn's heart shattered as he cradled Ferdia in his arms, his tears mingling with the blood on the ground. In his final moments, Ferdia reached up and touched Cú Chulainn's face, a silent gesture of forgiveness, of understanding. Cú Chulainn grasped his hand, holding it tightly, as if by sheer will he could keep Ferdia from slipping away. But death would not be denied, and with one last breath, Ferdia was gone, leaving Cú Chulainn alone with the weight of his actions. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Cú Chulainn remained where he was, holding his fallen friend. The grief that tore through him was unlike anything he had ever known. He had faced countless enemies, had fought and killed without hesitation, but this was different. This was the death of a part of himself, a loss that no victory could ever make right. In that moment, Cú Chulainn's legendary strength was broken, his heart laid bare for all the world to see. The warrior who had faced armies alone, who had stood against the might of Connacht, was now a man broken by the weight of his own deeds. The hero of Ulster, the Hound of Cúailnge, was now a grieving brother, mourning the loss of the one person who had truly understood him. And as the darkness of night began to creep across the land, Cú Chulainn knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The bond between him and Ferdia was forever severed, not by choice, but by the cruel hand of fate. The battle was won, but the victory felt hollow, a reminder of the price that had been paid. And in the silence of the night, Cú Chulainn wept, not just for the loss of his friend, but for the loss of a part of himself that could never be reclaimed. In the quiet before the storm, Cú Chulainn stood alone, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around him was thick with anticipation, the tension almost unbearable. He could feel it building within him, a force so primal, so fierce, that it threatened to tear him apart from the inside. This was no ordinary battle, no simple clash of warriors. This was something far more dangerous, far more uncontrollable. This was the Ryostrad, the warp spasm, the transformation that would turn him into something beyond human, something unstoppable. As the battle cries echoed in the distance, Cú Chulainn's body began to change. His muscles twisted and contorted, his skin tightening over bones that seemed to shift and grow. His eyes, once clear and sharp, now burned with an unearthly light, a fire that consumed everything in its path. His hair stood on end, glowing with a fierce, almost supernatural energy, as if it were aflame. The very air around him seemed to crackle with power, an aura of pure, unbridled rage. The transformation was terrifying to behold, a sight that struck fear into the hearts of friend and foe alike. Cú Chulainn was no longer just a man, he was a force of nature, a storm given flesh. His body swelled with power, his limbs moving with a speed and strength that defied all reason. He could feel the fury coursing through his veins, a tidal wave of anger and grief that threatened to drown him. But he did not fight it, he embraced it, letting the rage consume him, letting it fuel the warrior within. The ground trembled beneath his feet as he charged into battle, a whirlwind of destruction. His enemies fell before him like leaves in a storm, their screams lost in the roar of his fury. He moved with a savagery that defied all sense, his spear and sword cutting through flesh and bone with terrifying ease. There was no hesitation, no mercy in his strikes, only the relentless drive to destroy, to annihilate anything and anyone in his path. The battlefield became a blur of blood and chaos, the bodies of fallen warriors strewn about like broken dolls. Cú Chulainn's rage was a living thing, a beast unleashed, tearing through everything in its way. His eyes, glowing with the fire of the Ryostrad, saw only targets, enemies to be crushed underfoot. His heart, once filled with the love of friends and family, was now a hollow vessel, filled only with the need for vengeance, for destruction. But the Ryostrad did not discriminate. Cú Chulainn's rage was so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that it did not see the difference between friend and foe. His own warriors, those who had fought beside him for so long, now trembled in fear as he approached, their hearts gripped by the terror of his wrath. They called out to him, pleaded for him to stop, but their words fell on deaf ears. Cú Chulainn was beyond reason, beyond control. He was a god of war, unleashed upon the earth, and nothing could stand in his way. The cries of the dying filled the air, a haunting chorus that seemed to fuel his rage even further. His enemies, once so confident in their numbers, now fled before him, their courage shattered by the sight of his transformation. But there was no escape from Cú Chulainn. He pursued them with a relentless fury, cutting them down with a precision that was terrifying in its efficiency. Each strike, each blow, was delivered with the force of a hurricane, the power of a beast unleashed. And yet, even in the midst of his rage, there was a part of Cú Chulainn that remained aware, a small, flickering ember of his humanity that recognized the horror of what he was doing. But it was buried deep beneath the waves of fury, drowned out by the roar of the Ryostrad. He was a prisoner of his own power, trapped in a cycle of violence that he could not escape. The blood of his enemies soaked the ground beneath him, the air thick with the scent of death. Cú Chulainn stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving with the effort of the battle. But there was no satisfaction in his victory, no sense of triumph. Only the cold, hollow feeling of a warrior who had lost everything, even himself. The Ryostrad had taken him, turned him into something monstrous, and now, in the aftermath of his rage, he was left to confront the wreckage of what he had become. As the last echoes of the battle faded into the distance, Cú Chulainn felt the Ryostrad begin to recede. The fire in his eyes dimmed, his muscles relaxed, and the beast within him retreated back into the depths of his soul. He was left standing alone in the silence, surrounded by the bodies of those who had fallen, his heart heavy with the weight of his actions. The Ryostrad had granted him the power to win the battle, but at what cost? Cú Chulainn could still feel the echoes of the rage that had consumed him, the lingering taste of blood in his mouth. The price of his power had been steep, and as he looked around at the devastation he had wrought, he could not help but feel a deep, crushing sorrow. The rage had taken him to a place from which there was no return, and now, as he stood alone in the aftermath, he was left to wonder if he could ever find his way back to the man he once was. But for now, all he could do was stand in the silence, the echoes of his rage still ringing in his ears, and try to come to terms with the monster that had been unleashed within him. The battle was over, but the war within his soul had only just begun. Cú Chulainn stood alone on the battlefield, the weight of the world on his shoulders. His heart was heavy, his body weary, but his spirit remained unbroken. As he gazed across the desolate landscape, a figure emerged from the shadows, moving with an ethereal grace that sent a shiver down his spine. It was her, the Morrigan, the goddess of war and fate, the one who could twist the threads of life and death with a mere thought. She approached him with a smile that held both warmth and danger, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. There was something about her that drew him in, a power that was as alluring as it was terrifying. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of the ages. She spoke of destiny, of the paths that lay before him, and of the power that she could bestow upon him. There was an offer in her words, a promise of strength beyond anything he had ever known. But Cú Chulainn knew better than to trust the Morrigan. He had heard the stories, the tales of warriors who had fallen under her spell, only to be consumed by her dark desires. He could feel the pull of her power, the way it sought to wrap itself around his heart, to ensnare his soul. But he was not a man easily swayed, and he met her gaze with a resolve that burned as fiercely as the flames of his Ryostrad. She did not falter, though, even in the face of his rejection. Instead, she shifted her approach, her tone softening as she spoke of aid, of the battles yet to come. She offered him her assistance, a partnership that could turn the tide of any war, that could grant him victories beyond his wildest dreams. But Cú Chulainn, ever the lone warrior, could not accept such a bargain. His pride, his honor, would not allow it. He would not be beholden to a goddess, no matter how powerful she might be. His refusal stung, and for a moment, the Morrigan's eyes darkened, the warmth in her smile turning cold. She was not accustomed to being denied, to having her gift spurned by mere mortals. There was a flash of something dangerous in her gaze, a warning of the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. But Cú Chulainn stood firm, his heart steeled against the allure of her promises. He would walk his path alone, no matter how treacherous it might be. The Morrigan did not take rejection lightly. She was a goddess, a force of nature, and her will could not be easily defied. And so, she sought to test him, to break him, to see if this mortal warrior could truly withstand the power of the divine. She shifted her form, becoming a crow, a symbol of death and destruction, her wings casting a shadow over his soul. She circled above him, her cause echoing like a harbinger of doom, but Cú Chulainn did not waver. He stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the figure that had once been the Morrigan. In her crow form, she swooped down upon him, her claws aimed at his eyes, seeking to blind him, to weaken him. But Cú Chulainn was swift, his reflexes honed by years of battle. He dodged her attack, his spear striking out with deadly precision. It was not enough to kill a goddess, but it was enough to wound her, to send her reeling back into the skies, her cries filled with both pain and fury. The Morrigan returned to her human form, her expression now a mask of cold rage. She had offered him her aid, her power, and he had not only rejected her but had struck out against her. Her pride, her very essence, had been wounded, and she would not let this insult go unpunished. She promised him that they would meet again, that she would see him brought low, his body broken and his spirit crushed. But Cú Chulainn, with the fire of the Ryastrad still smoldering in his veins, did not fear her threats. He knew that his path was one of blood and battle, of sacrifice and suffering. He had accepted that long ago, when he first took up arms, when he first vowed to defend Ulster with his life. The Morrigan's wrath was just another challenge, another test of his strength and resolve. And he would face it, just as he had faced every other trial in his life, with courage, with honor, and with an unyielding spirit. Their encounters did not end there. The Morrigan, true to her word, returned to him in different forms, each time seeking to bring about his downfall. She came as a wolf, fierce and wild, trying to drive his horses into a frenzy. She came as an eel, slippery and treacherous, wrapping herself around his legs as he crossed a river, trying to drag him under. But each time, Cú Chulainn fought her off, his strength and determination unbroken. And yet, for all her attempts to challenge him, there was a strange respect that grew between them, a recognition of the other's power and resolve. The Morrigan, though a goddess, found herself drawn to this mortal who could stand against her, who could resist her with such fierce independence. And Cú Chulainn, though he knew the danger she posed, could not deny the strange connection that had formed between them, a bond forged in battle and conflict, and the unspoken understanding that they were, in many ways, two sides of the same coin. But in the end, Cú Chulainn's heart remained true to himself, to the warrior's path he had chosen. The Morrigan, with all her power and allure, could not sway him from the course he had set. He would fight his battles alone, without the aid of gods or goddesses, and he would face whatever fate had in store for him with the same unshakable resolve that had carried him this far. The Morrigan, for all her power, could not change who he was. And perhaps, in some small way, she respected him for that. For in Cú Chulainn, she saw a warrior who was not just strong of body, but strong of spirit, a man who could face even the gods themselves without flinching. And in the end, that was a strength that even a goddess like the Morrigan could not help but admire, even as she vowed to test it to its very limits. Cú Chulainn, the hero of Ulster, had faced countless enemies on the battlefield, but the battles that raged within his heart were far more devastating. The clash of swords and the cries of war had become the rhythm of his life, but nothing could have prepared him for the pain that would come from losing those he loved most. The day his son Comlet came into his life was filled with an eerie sense of destiny. Cú Chulainn had unknowingly fathered a child with Aoife, a warrior woman he had defeated in battle. She had sent Comlet across the sea to find his father, but fate had twisted the threads of their reunion into a cruel knot. Kamla, raised in a land far from his father's, was as skilled and fierce as Cú Chulainn himself. When the young boy arrived in Ulster, he was met with suspicion and hostility from the warriors there. Cú Chulainn, not recognizing his own blood, challenged Kamla to a duel. It was a fight neither wanted, but honor demanded it. They were both warriors, bound by the codes of battle that had shaped their lives. The clash of their weapons echoed across the land, a father fighting his son, both unaware of the truth that would soon break their hearts. The moment came when Cú Chulainn's spear, the deadly Gíbolg, found its mark. As Kamla fell to the ground, the realization of what he had done washed over Cú Chulainn like a tide of sorrow. He rushed to the boy's side, the blood draining from his face as he saw the unmistakable features that mirrored his own. Kamla, with his last breaths, revealed the truth, that he was Cú Chulainn's son, sent by his mother to find the father he had never known. The world seemed to collapse around Cú Chulainn as he held his dying son in his arms. The warrior who had never known fear was now faced with a pain that no weapon could defend against. The boy he had killed was his own flesh and blood, the innocent life that had been taken by his own hand. The gods themselves could not have devised a torment more cruel. The grief that welled up within him was a tidal wave, drowning out the sounds of battle, the cries of victory, and the cheers of the warriors. All that remained was the unbearable weight of a father's sorrow. Emmer, Cú Chulainn's wife, felt the ripples of this tragedy even before the news reached her. She had always known that loving a hero came with a price, but nothing could have prepared her for the pain of losing a child she had never known. When Cú Chulainn returned to her, his eyes hollow and his spirit broken, she saw in him a man who had faced the worst of what life could offer. The loss of Kamla was a wound that would never heal. Emmer's heart ached for her husband, for the child she had never held, and for the future that had been ripped away before it could even begin. The love she had for Cú Chulainn had always been fierce and unwavering, but now it was tempered with a sorrow that would shadow their lives forever. The hero of Ulster, the man who had faced armies and gods, was now broken by the one thing he could not fight, grief. As the days passed, the toll of being a hero became more apparent. Cú Chulainn, who had once been invincible, now carried the weight of his own sorrow and guilt like a burden too heavy to bear. The warrior who had once stood tall and unyielding now walked with a shadow over his heart. The loss of Kamla had taken something from him that no amount of victories could ever restore. Emmer watched helplessly as the man she loved slowly unraveled. The light in his eyes dimmed, and the laughter that once filled their home was replaced with silence. The love they shared had been a source of strength, but now it was laced with the bitterness of loss. Emmer mourned not just for Kamla, but for the man her husband had once been, the man who had been stolen away by the cruelty of fate. Cú Chulainn's heart, once so full of fire and passion, now burned with a different kind of intensity. The rage that had fueled him in battle was now turned inward, consuming him from within. The hero who had once stood against the world now found himself in a battle he could not win. The toll of being a hero was more than just the blood spilled on the battlefield, it was the lives lost, the love sacrificed, and the pain that lingered long after the war was over. The death of Kamla marked a turning point in Cú Chulainn's life. The warrior who had once been invincible was now a man haunted by his own choices, by the ghosts of those he had loved and lost. The sorrow that filled his heart was a constant reminder of the price he had paid for being a hero. It was a burden he would carry for the rest of his days, a weight that would never lift, no matter how many battles he won. For Emmer, the pain of losing Kamla was matched only by the pain of watching her husband slowly fade away. The love they had shared, once so vibrant and full of life, was now a shadow of what it had been. The hero of Ulster, the man she had loved with all her heart, was now a ghost of his former self, lost in the darkness of his own grief. In the end, the toll of being a hero was more than just the battles fought and the victories won. It was the lives lost, the love sacrificed, and the pain that lingered long after the war was over. Cú Chulainn, the hero of Ulster, had paid that price in full. The death of his son, the sorrow of his wife, and the toll on his own heart were the true cost of his heroism, a cost that would follow him to the end of his days. The air was thick with the scent of approaching doom, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Cú Chulainn knew that his end was near. His enemies had gathered like a storm on the horizon, a dark and menacing cloud that promised to engulf him. Each step he took was heavy, laden with the weight of 1,000 battles fought and 1,000 losses endured. He stood on the edge of a battlefield that would be his last, a warrior who had faced gods and monsters now facing the end of his own legend. The armies arrayed before him were vast and formidable, a sea of warriors driven by vengeance and the promise of his downfall. They had come from every corner, united by a common goal, to bring Cú Chulainn, the great hero of Ulster, to his knees. The preparation for his final stand was both somber and intense. His allies, few and weary, stood by him with a mixture of sorrow and pride. They knew that this battle would not just be a fight for survival but a testament to Cú Chulainn's indomitable spirit. They worked silently, their movements deliberate and respectful, as they readied their weapons and fortified their positions. The silence between them spoke volumes, a shared understanding of the gravity of the moment. Cú Chulainn's heart was heavy, not just with the weight of impending battle, but with the knowledge that this was the end of his journey. He looked out over the gathering storm of enemies, his gaze unwavering despite the shroud of dread that enveloped him. The omens and prophecies surrounding his fate had long been whispered among the people, tales of a hero whose end was foretold to be as grand and tragic as his life had been. The prophecies spoke of a final, cataclysmic battle, one that would seal his fate and carve his name into the annals of history forever. They had predicted a hero's end, one that would be both a triumph and a tragedy, a fitting conclusion to a life lived in the shadow of greatness. The signs had been clear, the darkening skies, the restless winds, and the strange portents that seemed to follow him wherever he went. In the quiet moments before the battle, Cú Chulainn took solace in the memories of his past victories, his achievements, and the love of those he had lost. He thought of Emmer, his wife, and the sorrow she would face without him. He thought of Kamla, his son, and the grief that had marked his final moments. His life had been a series of trials, each one shaping him into the hero he had become, but now he faced the ultimate test. As he stood ready, his enemies began their advance. The ground trembled under the weight of their approach, the sky darkening as if the heavens themselves mourned the coming clash. The roar of their battle cries was a thunderous wave that crashed over him, a sound that would soon be matched by the clash of swords and the cries of the fallen. Cú Chulainn's heart was a storm of emotions. He felt the weight of his destiny pressing down on him, the burden of a life spent fighting for honor and survival. The prophecies had promised that his final stand would be one for the ages, a moment that would define his legacy. The anticipation was palpable, the sense of inevitability inescapable. The final battle was more than just a clash of armies, it was the culmination of a lifetime of struggle and sacrifice. Cú Chulainn knew that his fate was sealed, that the end was drawing near. But even in the face of certain death, he refused to show any sign of weakness. He stood tall, his resolve unshaken, his spirit as fierce as ever. As the enemy forces closed in, the air was filled with the cacophony of battle preparations, shouts, the clatter of weapons, and the pounding of drums. The tension was electric, a tangible force that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Cú Chulainn could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a reminder of the life he had lived and the legacy he was about to leave behind. In the final hours before the battle began, Cú Chulainn took a moment to reflect on his life. He had fought valiantly, loved deeply, and suffered greatly. The end was now upon him, and he faced it with the same courage that had defined his entire life. He had accepted his fate long ago, had embraced the role of hero and warrior with all the passion and determination he could muster. And now, as the final battle loomed on the horizon, he prepared to face it with the same fierce resolve that had carried him through so many trials before. The omens were clear, the prophecies undeniable. The final stand was upon him, and Cú Chulainn would face it as he had faced everything in his life, with bravery, with honor, and with the unyielding spirit of a true hero. The battlefield was set, the enemies arrayed, and the moment of destiny was at hand. The great hero of Ulster, who had lived a life of epic struggles and profound sorrows, would now face his ultimate challenge, knowing that his legacy would be forever etched in the hearts of those who witnessed his final, heroic stand. The sky was a curtain of dark clouds, and the ground trembled as Cú Chulainn faced his final battle. The clash of swords and the roar of warriors created a chaotic symphony that filled the air with a palpable sense of foreboding. This was no ordinary fight. It was the end of an era, the final act in the tragic saga of a hero whose life had been marked by relentless valor and deep sorrow. As the battle raged around him, Cú Chulainn stood as a solitary beacon of defiance amidst the storm. His enemies closed in, their numbers overwhelming, but he remained unyielding. His heart pounded with the rhythm of countless battles, each beat a testament to his unwavering spirit. The weight of his destiny pressed heavily upon him, yet he fought with a fierce determination, driven by a resolve that only death could extinguish. The air was filled with the clash of metal, the cries of warriors, and the scent of blood and sweat. Cú Chulainn's movements were a dance of grace and power, each strike a reflection of his life's struggles and victories. His enemies came at him from all sides, their blows landing with the force of their shared hatred and fear. But he met each challenge with a fierce, unrelenting fury, his spirit burning bright even as his strength began to wane. The battle was brutal, a test of endurance and courage that pushed Cú Chulainn to the very edge. His enemies, relentless in their pursuit, were determined to see the great hero fall. The once unbreakable shield of Ulster was now a solitary figure standing against an ocean of foes. His body, weary from countless battles, bore the marks of his legendary struggle. His wounds were many, his strength fading, but his spirit remained unbowed. In the heart of this chaos, Cú Chulainn's defiance was a beacon of hope and despair. He fought with a ferocity that defied the very notion of defeat. His enemies, though numerous and fierce, could not break his spirit. Each swing of his sword, each block of a blow, was a testament to his unyielding resolve. Even as his strength ebbed and his wounds deepened, he remained a symbol of unbreakable courage, a hero who faced death with the same bravery that had defined his life. The final moments of Cú Chulainn's life were both heart-wrenching and awe-inspiring. As the battle drew to a close, he knew that his end was near. The once mighty hero, now a figure of tragic grandeur, faced his final moments with the same fierce determination that had driven him throughout his life. His enemies, sensing the end, closed in with a mixture of respect and grim satisfaction. In a final, defiant act, Cú Chulainn tied himself to a stone, a symbol of his unyielding spirit. He wanted to face his death standing tall, a testament to his refusal to surrender. The scene was both haunting and heroic, an image of a warrior bound by his own choice, refusing to fall until his last breath. His enemies watched in awe and fear, understanding that they faced not just a man but a legend, a hero who would not yield even in the face of the end. As he stood bound to the stone, Cú Chulainn's last moments were filled with a mixture of pain and pride. The fierce light in his eyes never dimmed, even as his body grew weaker. His defiance in the face of death was a final, powerful statement, a declaration that even in his final moments, he remained a hero of unparalleled courage. The battle around him continued, but the focus of all eyes was on Cú Chulainn. His enemies, who had once been driven by the desire to defeat him, now looked upon him with a mixture of respect and awe. They witnessed the end of a legend, a hero who had faced the ultimate test with the same bravery that had marked his entire life. In his last breaths, Cú Chulainn's spirit remained unbroken. He had lived a life of extraordinary bravery and profound sorrow, and he faced his end with the same fierce resolve. His final moments were a testament to his legendary status, a heart-wrenching reminder of the cost of greatness. The image of the hero tied to the stone, defiant to the last, would be etched in the memories of those who witnessed it, a powerful symbol of a life lived with unparalleled courage and honor. The skies wept as the news of Cú Chulainn's death spread through Ulster, the land mourning its greatest hero. The impact of his passing was profound, a gaping wound in the heart of a people who had known him as their shield and their strength. The very ground seemed to tremble in grief, echoing the loss of a warrior whose bravery had become the stuff of legends. In the wake of his death, Ulster was plunged into a period of sorrow and reflection. The hero who had stood alone against overwhelming odds was no longer there to guard them. His absence left a void that could not be filled, a silence where once there had been the roar of a mighty warrior. The people of Ulster, who had seen their lands protected by Cú Chulainn's unyielding spirit, now faced the world without the shield of their greatest champion. The reverence for Cú Chulainn's memory grew into a sacred tradition. He was remembered not just as a hero, but as a symbol of what it meant to fight with honor and courage. The stories of his deeds were passed down through generations, each telling imbued with a sense of awe and reverence. To speak his name was to evoke the spirit of a legend who had faced the fiercest challenges with an unwavering heart. Every corner of Ulster seemed to hold a memory of Cú Chulainn. The places where he had fought, where he had fallen, and where he had triumphed became sacred sites, visited by those who wished to honor his memory. His death was not just a personal loss, but a collective mourning for a hero whose life had touched every aspect of the land. In the quiet corners of the land, the tales of Cú Chulainn lived on. The bards and storytellers wove his story into their songs and stories, each recounting his valor with a passion that ensured his memory would never fade. The songs spoke of his battles, his loves, and his ultimate sacrifice, turning his life into a tapestry of legends that would be cherished by generations to come. The tales of Cú Chulainn became a part of the cultural fabric of Ulster. They were more than stories, they were a way of preserving his spirit, of keeping his bravery alive in the hearts of the people. Each retelling of his adventures was a tribute to a hero who had lived and died with unmatched courage. The songs and stories became a means of keeping his spirit alive, a way for the people to connect with their past and honor a hero who had given everything for them. As time passed, the legend of Cú Chulainn continued to inspire awe and admiration. His story was not just about his deeds, but about the ideals he represented: strength, honor, and an indomitable will. His legacy was etched into the very culture of Ulster, a reminder of the heights a single person could reach when driven by courage and conviction. The reverence for Cú Chulainn's memory was not confined to the present, it became a part of the future. The stories and songs ensured that his name would be remembered, his deeds celebrated, and his spirit honored long after the last warrior had laid down their sword. His life and death became a beacon for others, a symbol of what it meant to be truly heroic. Through the power of storytelling, Cú Chulainn's legend lived on, a heart-touching testament to a hero whose life had been both extraordinary and tragically brief. The impact of his death on Ulster was profound, but the continued reverence for his memory ensured that his spirit would never fade. The tales and songs that preserved his legend were a tribute to a man who had lived with unmatched bravery and left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who knew and remembered him. In the realm of Irish mythology, Cú Chulainn stands out like a blazing star in the night sky, his legend etched into the very fabric of the land. His story is not just one of individual heroism, but also a reflection of the timeless themes that resonate across cultures and ages. The life of Cú Chulainn, with its blend of bravery, tragedy, and divine intervention, captures the essence of what it means to be a hero in a world filled with both mortal and magical challenges. Cú Chulainn's role in Irish mythology is profound and multifaceted. He is celebrated not merely as a warrior, but as a symbol of the struggle between fate and free will. His life, marked by extraordinary feats and equally extraordinary suffering, reflects the duality of human existence, the tension between the heroic ideal and the harsh reality of mortality. His legendary deeds are woven into the fabric of myth, serving as both a source of inspiration and a stark reminder of the cost of greatness. Comparing Cú Chulainn to other mythological heroes reveals intriguing similarities and differences. Like Achilles from Greek mythology, Cú Chulainn possesses a near-mythical strength and a tragic fate. Both are central figures in their respective myths, embodying the warrior's ideal and facing death with unmatched courage. Yet, while Achilles' rage and eventual demise highlight themes of honor and retribution, Cú Chulainn's story intertwines with themes of sacrifice, destiny, and the inescapable consequences of his choices. In contrast, Cú Chulainn's tale shares some elements with the Norse hero Sigurd, whose own story is filled with valor, loss, and prophetic significance. Sigurd's quest for the dragon's treasure and his fateful encounters with gods and monsters parallel Cú Chulainn's own battles and encounters with the supernatural. Both heroes are products of their respective worlds' complex interplay between fate and personal choice. The symbolic significance of Cú Chulainn's story extends beyond mere comparisons to other heroes. His legend embodies the quintessential struggle between human aspiration and the often cruel hand of fate. His extraordinary feats, like single-handedly defending Ulster against overwhelming odds, symbolized the height of heroic achievement. Yet, his eventual downfall, marked by betrayal and personal loss, underscores the tragic cost of living a life defined by constant conflict and struggle. Cú Chulainn's transformation into the Ryostrad, or warp spasm, exemplifies the intense and sometimes uncontrollable nature of his heroic spirit. This fearsome battle rage, which causes him to become a whirlwind of destruction, symbolizes the raw, untamed aspect of human nature that both inspires awe and evokes fear. It is a reminder that greatness often comes with a price, and that the very qualities that make a hero extraordinary can also lead to their undoing. In the broader context of mythology, Cú Chulainn's story highlights the universal themes of heroism and tragedy. His life is a testament to the idea that true heroism involves not just physical prowess, but also the courage to face one's fate with dignity. His legacy, preserved through songs, stories, and cultural reverence, serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of myth to shape and reflect human experience. Through the lens of mythology, Cú Chulainn is more than just a legendary figure. He is a symbol of the eternal struggle between human ambition and the inevitability of fate. His story, filled with moments of breathtaking bravery and profound sorrow, resonates with the timeless themes of heroism, sacrifice, and the quest for meaning in a world filled with both wonder and peril. Cú Chulainn's legacy has not only survived through the ages but has also been powerfully reimagined in modern culture. His story, once confined to ancient texts and oral traditions, has burst into contemporary literature, art, and media, capturing the imaginations of new generations. In literature, Cú Chulainn's tale continues to resonate with readers. Authors have brought his legend to life with fresh interpretations, exploring his heroic feats and tragic end in innovative ways. From novels that reimagine his adventures to poetic works that delve into his internal struggles, Cú Chulainn's story remains a powerful narrative of heroism and sacrifice. Each retelling adds layers to his character, revealing different facets of his bravery and the complexities of his fate. Art has also been a vibrant canvas for Cú Chulainn's legend. Painters and illustrators have drawn inspiration from his dramatic battles and his mystical encounters. The image of Cú Chulainn, often depicted in fierce battle stances or surrounded by the chaos of his warp spasm, captures the intensity of his character. Artists use bold colors and dynamic compositions to convey the raw energy and tragic beauty of his story. These visual representations make the ancient hero come alive in a way that is both immediate and profound. In media, Cú Chulainn's influence can be seen in films, television shows, and video games. Modern adaptations have taken creative liberties while staying true to the essence of his legend. Movies and series often depict his epic battles and his personal struggles, blending the mythological with the cinematic to engage audiences with high-stakes drama and action. Video games have introduced players to the world of Cú Chulainn, allowing them to experience his adventures firsthand. These modern portrayals make his story accessible to a global audience, bridging the gap between ancient myth and contemporary entertainment. The impact of Cú Chulainn on Irish culture remains profound. His legend is woven into the cultural fabric of Ireland, where he is celebrated not just as a historical figure but as a symbol of national pride and resilience. Festivals, performances, and cultural events often pay homage to his memory, reflecting his enduring importance in the collective consciousness of the Irish people. His story is a source of inspiration, embodying qualities of courage, honor, and sacrifice that continue to resonate deeply with the Irish spirit. Modern interpretations of Cú Chulainn's tale have explored new dimensions of his character. Writers and creators have examined his internal conflicts and moral dilemmas, offering a more nuanced view of the hero's life. These adaptations question and expand upon traditional narratives, presenting Cú Chulainn as a complex figure whose heroism is intertwined with personal tragedy and moral ambiguity. The ongoing influence of Cú Chulainn's story demonstrates the timeless nature of his legend. Through literature, art, and media, his tale has been adapted and transformed, keeping his memory alive in the hearts and minds of people around the world. Each new depiction of Cú Chulainn brings his story to a fresh audience, ensuring that the hero's legacy continues to inspire and captivate. His journey from ancient myth to modern cultural icon is a testament to the enduring power of his legend and the universal themes that it embodies. Cú Chulainn's story remains as vivid and compelling today as it was in ancient times. His legend, brimming with heroism and heartache, continues to captivate imaginations across the globe. The enduring appeal of his story is a testament to the universal themes it embodies and the powerful emotions it evokes. Cú Chulainn's tale speaks to something deep within us all. His incredible feats, from single-handedly defending Ulster to his tragic and defiant end, resonate with the timeless struggle between ambition and fate. He embodies the heroic ideal, a figure who faces overwhelming odds with unyielding courage. This timeless appeal is not just about his physical prowess, but about the very human qualities of bravery, loyalty, and the personal cost of heroism. Cú Chulainn's life reminds us that true heroism is often accompanied by profound sacrifice and personal suffering. The lessons drawn from Cú Chulainn's life are both powerful and poignant. His story teaches us about the complexity of human nature and the consequences of living a life defined by relentless struggle. His unwavering commitment to Ulster, even in the face of overwhelming personal loss, illustrates the depth of loyalty and duty. Yet, his tale also serves as a cautionary reminder of the burdens carried by those who are set apart by their extraordinary deeds. The hero's journey is marked by glory, but it is also shadowed by profound personal cost. Cú Chulainn's place in the collective imagination is firmly established. He is more than a figure of ancient myth, he is a symbol of the eternal human spirit. His story is not confined to the pages of history or literature but lives on in the cultural consciousness. His legacy continues to inspire stories, art, and discussions about the nature of heroism and the human condition. Through each retelling and adaptation, Cú Chulainn remains a beacon of what it means to confront fate with courage and integrity. As a hero, Cú Chulainn occupies a unique place in our hearts. He represents the ideal of fighting against the odds, the sacrifice that comes with great deeds, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. His story invites us to reflect on our own lives and the ways in which we confront our personal challenges. It challenges us to consider the price of our own ambitions and the sacrifices we make in the pursuit of our ideals. The emotional impact of Cú Chulainn's legend lies in its raw portrayal of a hero's journey, one filled with both triumph and tragedy. His life and deeds offer a powerful mirror to our own experiences, reflecting the highs and lows of our struggles and successes. Through his story, we find a hero whose journey transcends time, reminding us of the enduring power of legend and the universal truths it reveals.